Hello and welcome to yet another edition of News 18 presents Yuva Bharat in association with IMAN, a student body which is engaging with the youth and also with the larger purpose of a movement to unite nations with the idea or the philosophy that Bharat believes in. Now, in this case today, it's a very, very august panel that we've curated together, and I need to thank Rishabh and his team for that. It's because we need to understand the regional dynamics. How does it matter to us as an individual, as a youngster who's about to seeing his board exams cancelled, does not know what's going to happen next? Why should it matter what another nation is doing in the Indo-Pacific in this region, and how does it affect me as an Indian citizen, as a global citizen, and why it is important? So discuss that, especially with the developments around the Hambantota and the port city in Colombo and the CCP's expansionist designs, this entire comprehensive national power theory, and why it is a challenge for nations in this region and also across the world. So that's what we'll try and focus on. And I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce our guest, Rishabh, with your permission, Dr. Satoru Nagao, fellow non-resident at the Hudson Institute, joining us from Tokyo in Japan. I have Ambassador T.P. Srinivasan. He's served as a permanent representative of the Government of India at the UN. Ambassador Srinivasan, a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Roger Liu, who I've engaged with many times on debates, and he's an associate professor with Flame University, and he's also somewhere connected with the Gateway House, from where we also have Samir Patil, who's a fellow international studies at the Gateway House. And last but not the least, President of IMAN, Rishabh Shah. So Rishabh, you want to take this?
I think firstly, just want to thank you and the network for curating, a show which is dedicated towards young people, and especially now on this topic, because I think this is so very important. Ambassador Srinivasan, you've served at the UN. Your thoughts on what China is doing and why is it so important for young people to understand this, given the fact that these are the people who are going to be making decisions from 15 years from now. So what is it that they need to understand, and why is it so important for them to understand China's OBOR, string of pearls, and so on and so forth?
Well, there are many imponderables here to make any kind of prediction. But one thing is certain, that 15 years from now, definitely China would be the most prominent country in the world. Of course, I'm not, diluting the importance of the United States. The United States still hopes that it will hold the first position, and let's hope that happens. But the way the Chinese are moving about in the world, it looks as though a few more years are required for them to catch up, but they are really going to catch up and probably become the most influential country in the world. But that brings them a lot of responsibilities. When you talk about string of pearls, etc., it's a little outdated. They're not thinking in terms of such narrow string of pearls around India, etc. They want to be a string of pearls around the world. That's what they want. And that's the vision that they have. So it is not a matter of a few things changing here and there, but a matter of a completely change in the world. It will be a different. There are two aspects to it. How do we deal with the pandemic? We have no idea what the population of the world would be once pandemic is over. Demographic changes could take place. And the second thing we need to know is how far the United States will be able to recover from its present situation, and will be able to focus on so many issues from which President Trump used to escape by saying it was America first. So once we know these two things, the outcome of the pandemic, which we cannot underestimate, there could be such big demographic changes that it might change geopolitics of the world. The other thing that will happen is whether China can manage a strict regimented political system and open economic system. It's an old question. People keep asking, how do you coexist the two? And that is one thing. And the other imponderable is the environmental problems in China. It could be so overwhelming that China may be not able to reach the kind of position that they want to do. So these are all the various things that we do not know as yet. But given to China, of course, their objective is to be number one in the world. And they think that they can attain it. And the rest of the world also seems to think that if those two or three things that I mentioned do not happen, probably we'll all be speaking Chinese in 15 years.
Now that's the difference, Ambassador Srinivasan. There is a difference between wanting your nation to be the number one in the world and converting everybody else to what your nation believes or to what your nation is. These are two different aspects. So you have a comprehensive national power theory where you want to make yourself big and you want to grow and you want to supersede some other nations. But when you want to control other nations and change their demographics, change the way they think, change the way the languages they speak, change their ethnoculture or their entire background, then the intention is moves away from just making sure your nation is strong. Dr. Rojalu, can you just talk a little more on this comprehensive national power and how China has continued to pursue this? In fact, use this pandemic to further that goal.
Well, I think China is trying to make every opportunity to use the COVID-19 to expand their influence in the region, not only in the South Asian region, but the Southeast Asian region as well. So this is actually a continuation of the BRI or Belt and Road Initiative, but with the booster of the COVID-19. So China has deemed Southeast Asia region as the core region for them to exercise their BRI. So as we can see here, well, China has been using the economic statecraft and the diplomatic statecraft kind of control this region. So BRI is mainly about economic statecraft, but we must not forget that behind that actually is the grand plans of the China's geopolitical schemes.
Interesting. Before I bring in Dr. Nagao, Sami, one of the aspects is, if I remember, 18th to 20th October 1986, when under General Sundarji we taught the Chinese a lesson. I was 9 years old. Okay, at that time, nobody thought that we don't need to fear the Chinese. Nobody remembers Sikkim 1967. Everybody believes 1960. How is it that this current generation, the 90s generation, who have not seen a fight or a war with the Chinese, have somehow got it in their head that we need to fear the Chinese?
Yeah, well,
There is a game they play. There's a very interesting game they play, don't they? Of dominance. I'm just going to bring in Samir and then Dr. Satoru Nagao, I'll come across to you. Samir, this entire dominance aspect.
You're absolutely correct in saying that the Chinese are playing this game of dominance, and I think one way that they have actually exercised played that game of dominance over the current generation is through the role of technology. I mean, we have seen how the Chinese have taken the lead in some of the emerging technologies such as facial recognition, artificial intelligence, and I think by joining hands with some of the other like-minded countries, they're trying to reduce the capability gap with the United States. And current generation being tech savvy, they are seeing this they're encountering this Chinese technology everywhere. From the smartphones to some of the other things. We have the apps like the TikTok, which we banned last year. So I think the Chinese are playing that game of technology to showcase, that they are emerging as a dominant power. And I think the other manifestation of that is also through the cyber threat, which again they have targeted their adversarial states by launching the espionage campaigns and so some of those things. Just recently, we saw the example of how in Africa they were trying to spy on the African Union Parliament, and we have also seen the instances of that both with regard to India as well as in the neighborhood. So I think that is how the Chinese are playing that particular game.
No, and they've used the soft power to match with their military power and to establish their military might without exercising military power. Look at how in their older movies in the 80s, 90s, they used to say Chinese kung fu is better than Japanese karate. Okay, so that narrative started from there, and then they moved to a Karate Kid with Jackie Chan trying to teach a Jaden Smith that we can teach the Americans how to defend themselves. And to show that the American perception and the Chinese are far more advanced, and Americans are actually coming to find employment in China. So you see how they used soft narratives to try and enter into the minds. Now Mandarin has become compulsory in some of the schools in the United Kingdom. In Belgium, they've taken over the running of schools and some universities. In Oxford University, it's the Chinese studies and it's the Chinese lobby that is actually acting against Indian students and trying to control the narrative in terms of also a leftist communist narrative. See how they are trying to plug themselves, and then they use the economic power. Dr. Satoru Nagao, you as a Japanese would know how much they are trying to use this So if you could explain to our viewers, and even within the Olympics itself, now there is a certain level of, this one that the Chinese are willing to host the Winter Olympics while unleashing the pandemic to the rest of the world. Then they try to create problems with the islands where and they try to create trouble during the say at a time when Japan as a nation and this entire region was battling the pandemic. Everywhere they always use anything and everything to assert their dominance.
When we check the power balance, yes, China's power is growing, and how to win, or how weaker side win against stronger enemy. That's one kind of tactics you try to say. But so that is, yes, that is a tactics of judo in the Olympics. That's true. But at the same time, when we compare the current power balance, we should not underestimate US power. US is still stronger than China. So in this case, is this a proper tactics to deal with China? I don't think so indeed. Still, China is weaker side. Recently, China's attitude toward its neighbor been escalating. In last year, the India-China border, 5,000 Chinese troops entered Indian territory and clashed with Indian troops, and 20 Indian soldiers sacrificed their lives. So, but China also provoking Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, Philippines, other countries, or even the United States, U.S. warship targeted by the laser came from the Chinese warship. So all of these has taken place during the COVID-19 crisis. So this means that China is not popular now. So is China powerful? Not powerful. They do not have the friends. So to counter China's escalating activities, the US has stepped up its deterrence effort. And in this case, this is very serious. As a Japanese, I can say, why? Because last 245 years, US say this is history. Only 245 they say, but this 245 years is very important history, because if this is true, US spent only 169 years to change from just a colony of British Empire to the only one superpower in the world. And another 76 years, they have maintained their status. And during this process, all of the rivals, including Japan, has disappeared. So this means that if US start to say China is most serious competitor, what will happen to China? If China will survive, it will be a miracle in the history. So, because first case in the last 245 years. So we should not underestimate US power in this case. So our tactics should be still, we can win.
Well, what we are doing about China, we may have different views as to how it could have been handled or how it is being handled. But one thing is certain, that it is not a fair competition. That we must remember. So that is why we need to change our positions and shift around, because the pursuit of power and domination that is exhibited by China is unparalleled. This has not happened. Many people did it in a more delicate manner, indirect manner, etc. But here they are determined to do this with the military power. So if you're looking at military power, we cannot even compare ourselves with that. Then you have the economic power. There also we are 1/5 or whatever. So in those circumstances, what options do we have? We need to have a very flexible policy in which we try to win friends and influence people and gain strength, soft power, etc. But China's focus is not on that. China doesn't care if the world doesn't like them. They have done many things which are very unpopular with the world. This pandemic itself is something which has not made them, endeared them. But our approach is different. We are trying to win people with all the, the traditional wisdom that we have, and our culture and secularism and so on. So the soft power approach to China is not particularly effective.
So there is an impact which is already being seen, and the Chinese will now gain control. Over a decade from now, they would have, cultivated Sri Lanka. in the sense Mandarin, Han population coming through, ethnoculturalism and dominance, and this, and they will only grow. It's like mold, you know. You ignore it, it looks like a small little patch on the wall, and then suddenly it's grown all over, and that's what they will do. But what does that mean for us? Because look what they've done. They've got their presence in Port Qasim. They've got it in Qum in Oman. They are there in Gwadar. They've got Djibouti. They've got now Sri Lanka. And here on the Rakhine State, they are
Even
making
Iran, even Iran.
Iran, yeah, and Iran, and then that means they're getting into Chabahar, but although it's still there. But in terms of Rakhine State and also Bangladesh, so are we looking at an inevitable 15 years from now?
Okay. So what kind of threat? I can compare threat from Russia and threat from China. I simply said, Russia is burglar and China is thief. How different? Russia have the confidence, their military power. When they find a chance, they use military. But when we check the record of China, indeed, China's expansion is not based on their military tactics. Indeed, when they find a power vacuum, they take it. This is a pattern of China's expansion. When we check what happened in South China Sea, China expanded 4 times in the past. First one is when France withdrew from Indochina in 1950s. They take half of the Paracel Island. In 1970s, when America withdrew from Vietnam after the Vietnam War, they take another half of Paracel Island. In 1980s, when Soviet Union reduced their troops from Vietnam, they take the 6th feature of the Spratly Island. And in 1990s, when US troops withdraw from Philippines, China take Mischief Reef. So every time when the military balance has changed, when they find a power vacuum, they steal it. This is thief, not burglar, like Russia. So when we check the situation in the Indian Ocean region, including Hambantota port, what happened? Cause of problem is money. Because China has ample budget, they can modernize the military, show the military force, and buy the country by using the Belt and Road Initiative and create huge depot. So what kind of threat China's threat is? This is economical threat. Ample budget is key. So let's reduce China's income is proper policy. This is not war. This is Cold War. If we compare the war and the Cold War, not exactly the same as the US-Soviet Cold War, but this is problem of money.
Oh, very well said. You said take the money out of China. So and then so when they don't have deep pockets, they can't buy out nations. But Sameer, that's not easy. But for that, you will also have to ensure that there is democracy in China. That's another way of looking at it.
I agree with you, Anand. Actually, I mean, the expectation was that probably with the economic development, the Chinese people will actually start demanding more political rights from the leadership, from the CCP leadership. But I think that has not happened. And in fact, now people are content with whatever that they are getting economically, but not paying attention to the politics, the political space. And I think the CCP is capitalizing on that. And we have seen the perfect example of that in Hong Kong, where they lured the territory with the one country, two systems kind of model, and then after that unleashed their autocratic forces on the territory. I think it will be very difficult for some time at least that to unseat the CCP from its position of power, and therefore I think I go with what Dr. Satoru said about bringing in the economic forces to the table and make sure that we can at least make sure that the economic clout of China is reduced. And I think, given the fact that we have the alliances such as Quad, the formations, alignments such as Quad, and we have the G7 and the other kind of models, we can actually have that, we can give it a shot to make sure that at least there is some sort of weakening of the Chinese economic clout through either diversification of supply chains, making sure that we get Taiwan on board for some of the hardware development so that we can actually have some kind of hardware independence from China and those kind of things.
See, that's the unrestricted policy which Dr. Rajulu is not going to be easy for democracies to counter. To take the fight to them, you have to outsmart, outthink, and you have to be somewhere or the other like them, not just stand up to them. And that's not easy for democracies to do.
Right. Like just like you point out, because they are like they look to be a unified political unit control under the heavy control of the Chinese Communist Party. And we are democracy here, but that's just for the short term. Because I believe that in the long term, democracy actually is more vital and more rigid compared with the authoritarian regimes. We have to wait. I mean, for the future, I will say that this is a long competition between two major political systems. One is authoritarianism, the other is democracy, which is representative by China, the Beijing model, and the other is not just represented by Western countries. But India is very important because India is about the size of China. And India is we can say India is a growing democracy, although we have inherited democracy since our independence days. But we are polishing it, we are trying to improve that. And I think that's very important that if our country, I mean India, can use the outside pressure posed by China as an opportunity to carry out further reforms inside of our country, I think that is no opportunity is better than this.
People have to understand that they need to start doing things on their own rather than buying everything from the Chinese, because the Chinese will dump everything and then they will subjugate you. Here I am trying to tell my kids that reduce your dependence on English, start learning Hindi, Sanskrit, Tamil, and Malayalam. And now we are looking at a situation that 10 years down the line, we'll have to start teaching them Mandarin or the next generations. So there has to be a certain consciousness about this, isn't it, Ambassador Saab?
No, but dealing with them economically has been tried by the United States. There was a virtual trade war. And who won it? Nobody wins trade wars. Both sides lose. That is what their experience. And technology, we tried to restrain technology and investment in India. And we moved on to Atmanirbhar, etc. But we have realized also that is very limited. Atmanirbhar, arrangements cannot beat the penetration of Chinese money into the whole world. So that also has not worked. And the democracy is not something which is transferable. And we have never tried to impose democracy on anybody else. We have never been shy of dealing with any kind of government, communist governments or anybody else.
So a lot of these aspects are important, but immediately it just looks like the dragon is on the rise and it's looming large. Its shadows are looming large even on the Indian subcontinent.
That's where I actually just wanted to quickly chime in and say that everybody has more wisdom and more knowledge on the subject area than me, but I would like to say this, that a lot of people in young India, Yuva Bharat, have that utopian belief that the Chinese dragon can be countered. We've got 356 million young people who are below the age of 24, and even so more 600 million who are below the age of 35. You've got a young educated population with you. You've got young entrepreneurs who are wanting to bring about change. You've also got young people in foreign service, in the military, who believe that this can be countered. It's just that a robust mechanism needs to be created. And of course, some are from think tanks, therefore they know how to think. I can only simply say that if you put so many young educated minds together, you're going to get a much better. And I'm not saying that this foreign policy that we've currently adopted is good or bad, but I can definitely say that in the last 70 years, if we've not been able to counter China because of numerous reasons, I think there is something that's gone systemically wrong. And it's high time that we utilize the resources that we currently have. And especially this government is trying to do that. And that's where it's very different from a few of the other administrations.
So there is a lot that we can speak about, but time is of essence. So I'm going to wind this up at this moment with the hope and belief that we will again engage and we will take this conversation forward very, very soon. I thank you all for sparing the time and also joining us here. Thank you very much.